Welcome to Planet of the Associations. I'm Seth Kahn.
And I am Mark Levy.
And Mark, tell us what we're doing here.
Planet of the Associations is a vlog and podcast all about the association of the near future, 3 years from now, X+3. It's ways to build and to strategize an association that's going to thrive in 3 years, both for itself and the community.
And every time you say that, I think X+3. That's like a mathematical term that just hovers in my brain. I feel like I'm walking around the world looking at 3 years from now. How's that going to be different? How's that going to be different? And it's all because of the way you framed that here for Planet of the Association.
Well, as you and I were just talking about, those of you who don't know Seth, so he has a degree in advanced mathematics. And I was just asking him in between tapes, because we usually tape a few of these at once. As you can tell, we actually change our clothes in between, but we're taping them on the same day. So I said to him, we were talking about mathematics and about patterns or so. And I said, when I speak, do you reduce what I'm saying to an equation? Like I'm saying this sentence, but in your mind, are you going X plus X plus X plus X? Yeah.
I'm doing it in binary. The ones and zeros are just rolling in.
Right. Exactly.
No, I don't know. A mathematician would not say that I have a degree in advanced mathematics, but a lay person would. Isn't that weird how like once you're in a space, something that which seems, really advanced to somebody who's not in the space is kind of normal to everybody who's in the space. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. In fact, I think of you like that because of your deep engagement with magic. And, I don't have that same level of deep engagement. I mean, I had a magic set when I was a kid. I enjoyed magic. I think one of the reasons I went into theater is because I love pleasing a crowd. I find that just so invigorating. And magic was a great way to do that. Now, I was never skilled enough to please a large crowd. I'd do it with my family, and I'm sure they gave me the benefit of a doubt more than once. But still, there's something joyous about witnessing an illusion. So I have a question to ask you as somebody who's what I would consider to be a magician expert or a magic expert, which is, do you hold on to that joy yourself, or does knowing so many tricks, does that dilute the experience of enjoyment for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, and as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, X plus X plus X. It's a great question. I would say that I get a different kind of joy from magic because there's the joy of the methodology. And there's also the joy of reading a magic catalog and reading about certain effects that you may not know the method of yet, and trying to guess about what the method is. So there's still a joy, but I wouldn't say it's that purity. Because magicians, at least all magicians I know, because, I interview people all the time, right? I always say, what's your favorite trick? Constantly. It's just my way of being. For you today, I did 2 magic tricks for you. And what did I say? Which one did you like better?
Oh, that's right.
Why did you like it better?
Yes.
That's just who I am. I just find interesting in how things are landing. It's always. And now I forgot what I was going to say. X plus
I was asking you about the joy, and you said the joy is there. It's just not the same joy.
Well, because when a magician is watching a trick, a magician is constantly thinking, how is it done? And now you could argue that a spectator, we call them different things, muggles, laymen, spectators, audience, like different things. But a spectator, you could say, oh, yeah, well, I'm trying to figure it out, too. But a magician is trying to figure it out with knowledge that they've gained probably from years and years and years. So a magician's probably not just figuring something out, but they are probably figuring out variations of it. And it's very, very strange. If we spoke about this before, I apologize. But just it's super funny. It reminds me, a friend of mine was a professional cameraman. And like on Scorsese film and so. And he would go to union meetings in Greenwich Village. And he said, if you went to one of the union meetings, you would go nuts. You wouldn't know what was happening. And I said, why not? He said, because occasionally we screen films. And so imagine there's a little theater in some building in Greenwich Village, and there's like 50 people sitting there. And we're watching a film, and you're watching the film too. You're there in the audience. And suddenly, like the film's just going along normally and nothing seems different to you, but everyone else in the theater goes, And he said, it's because like maybe something went out of focus in the slightest possible way that a regular person wouldn't know. But like the technical people are all, oh my God.
Right.
Like, but you'd look around saying, what just happened? I didn't see anything. So it's the same thing. I've actually been, and again, I apologize if we've talked about this before. I've actually been with people, with spectators, with laymen, going to magic stuff. I remember going to a show once with someone, and we watched a mentalist, right? Like a mind reader perform. And I went with Steve Cohen, the Millionaire's Magician, and someone else, a layman. And Steve and I were bored out of our minds. Like we couldn't bear it. It was so mediocre. It was so ordinary. And when we got out, when the performance was over, the woman met us on the street. And she said, do you know how that stuff was done? And we said, yeah, we do. And she said, I can't believe you could walk around in reality the way you do, knowing how that stuff is done. In other words, she gave us, we looked at knowing how it was done as engineering.
Right. Yeah.
Like 2 + 2 + 3 is 7. That's how we looked upon it. We looked upon it as that we had like the arcane secrets of the universe. And, but I encounter that a lot, but that's one of the things that makes magic so great. People have different experiences of it. By the way, at that time, that was a long time ago, that show I just talked about. Now I would rarely say to someone, I know how that's done. Because I find that just gets in the way, that steps on their enjoyment of it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I'm evolved enough to say that I never do that, but in general, I try to keep the experience pure for them, because I was one day having dinner with a friend of mine, a very famous magic writer, and we were with his in-laws. And we were all sitting around, and this is when David Blaine did his first special, and he was levitating. And so, the famous magic writer and I know methodologies. And so, but the family who doesn't said, oh my gosh, that David Blaine, he's amazing. Do you know how he did that stuff? And the famous magic writer who I was with said, no, we're still trying to figure it out. And that left such an impression on me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of like, oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Like, keep the illusion going.
Right. That's the ultimate payoff of a good trick, right? Is the wow the audience gets. And by stepping on that, you're actually, deflating that experience for that audience member. And it's beautiful that you recognize that.
I wouldn't, you're giving me too much, or in a ham-handed way recognize it. I wasn't quite as elegant, but you're talking about, like leaving the moment pure for the audience, giving them we're talking about David Blaine. So one thing that David does that's super cool, like he'll perform a magic trick, and you see this in his early specials. He'll perform a magic trick for someone on the street, and they'll be freaking out, and he does not like back up or slough it off like it's like nothing,
Right,
like,
right.
oh yeah, yeah. But a lot of magicians do that they're embarrassed at this moment of astonishment. So they'll make,
So
a yuck yuck joke, or they'll diffuse because it's so much tension
Right.
to be at the point where someone's freaking out that they can't take it. But like David would not do that. Like he would just stand there and allow them to have that moment without him having to diffuse it.
Yeah, I do. I think that that's the ultimate payoff for the magic trick from the audience's point of view, is that moment. That's where it all comes together. And it's so interesting to me. It seems like such a natural human reaction to try and diffuse that energy, or to blow it off and to say, oh, it was really nothing, right? When actually that is the very thing you're trying to create, right? And you've got it right in front of you. It's happening now. And it sounds like Blaine really knows how to care for that and help make it special for the audience, which is what you want. I'm saying that as a professional audience member.
Right. As a muggle.
Yeah, as a muggle. Now, every profession has that, right? I mean, if you're a cardiologist, there's things you understand that ordinary mortals don't.
Is that a card magician?
Whatever if you're an engineer, if you know how to build bridges, there's things that have to do with leverage and weight that you understand. Most people look at a bridge and say, how's that thing being held up? And all the bridge engineers are like, it's obvious, right? It's like very clear to me how it's being held up. But with magic, because there's this, first of all, it's a public event, or it's geared towards an audience. Then and that's where the payoff happens. When you're driving over a bridge, the payoff happens when nothing happens. Right.
Well put.
Like when you don't notice that you're on a freaking bridge, that's when the payoff happens, which means that there's no awareness at all. So, but when you're watching a card trick or watching someone make the Statue of Liberty disappear or levitate, the payoff happens when you get that clutch in your stomach and you're going, how could that be? That's the moment, right? And so I think there's something special about caretaking that moment for the audience that makes magic something that many people are interested in. Like I'm not that, well, actually I am interested in bridge dynamics, but I'm sure there's a lot of engineering that I'm not that interested in. Whereas with magic, my head turns too. I want to see too. I want to be amazed too. We all want to be amazed. Now, from talking with you, I know that you're not just somebody who's deep into magic, but you're someone who's deep into the history of magic. You've shared with me many different kinds of magicians along the way, different types of magic, the different time periods when certain tricks were created or performed. Tell us something we're not likely to know about magic and its history or what it does in the world.
Oh, well, there's countless things. Let me see. Something that's particularly relevant would be, well, let's see. If we look at Houdini.
Okay.
Right? Houdini was born in 1876. And when he was first performing, he tried his hand at specializing. He was a dime musician, performer. He would perform, these burlesque type shows. And he first tried to be the king of cards with K's, king of cards,
Uh-huh.
So in other words, he tried specializing in things. And that stuff wasn't working so well. So he decided to specialize in danger. So he started to do escapes, and his first escapes were just done in manacles or so on stage. So there was a degree of danger there, but it wasn't dangerous enough. And so then he started to do that stuff, in icy rivers, under ice, hanging from straitjackets, upside down by his feet from skyscrapers, X stories above the pavement and so forth, being sealed in a safe. He was stitched up in a giant football. He had like all kinds of, paper bag. He had all kinds of ways. He would go to foreign countries, and he would challenge the jailers there to, and he'd be stripped nude. It was all kinds of things to make it dangerous and salacious and like really interesting. So he realized that so when what he was doing was not working, he didn't quit the field. He changed.
Wow.
What the field was, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like he changed what it was that he was doing. So that would be an example of the story. I remember, by the way, Steve Cohen, the Millionaire's Magician, who I co-created his show and I created his brand. I remember Steve once said to me, I should have, the show's called Chamber Magic. He said, I should have danger in the show. And I said, Steve, the most dangerous thing in the show right now is your cholesterol. That's all I remember. But anyway, so that would be. So where is then, so thank you for asking these questions. How does this relate to associations? The idea of magic, of freaking people out about the history, about danger, about all these things that I'm saying, right? Because everyone knows the aesthetic on the show. Every entry point is equally valid. And That's then right. We see how we can take it in order to create something.
Well, I think, when I'm listening to you talk about Houdini, and I didn't know that, it sounds to me like he was able to find an emotional response and drive to the essence of it. He thought, wow, if people are in awe, how can I ramp that up? How can I increase that? And the best way to do that would be to put myself in mortal danger. I mean, first varying degrees of it. Like you said, manacled on stage is very different than being manacled under the ice or hanging from a flagpole up, several stories tall. But nonetheless, he'd say, what would look really dangerous from the audience point of view? What would freak them out? And then he set about doing it, figuring out how to make it work. And I think that was one of the things that enticed me about your tale was I imagined that Houdini was alone primarily. I mean, maybe he had some confidants, but he did not like today where you can go to a convention of magicians or where there are resources and you can tap other people. What do you think?
Well, Houdini, I believe, was the first president or like co-founder or something of the Society of American Magicians. But that's right. He helped create a society around it.
So he was a frontiers person. He was like Daniel Boone. There was nobody serving him breakfast. He had to go out and find his breakfast. And so, I mean, just imagine Houdini's mindset. He's thinking to himself, okay, if I was trapped under ice in frozen water and I was manacled by the local police chief and there was no way that I could have seen those handcuffs in advance, right? Then people would look at that and go, and so that's what I'm going to figure out how to do. And then he would probably deconstruct the trick in his mind and he'd come up with a method or he'd apply things that had worked in the past and then he'd go do it, try it out. I mean, that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. Well, and to put it differently from an association perspective, it's the idea of sometimes you need to think of ways you need to manufacture things that create buzz.
Yes.
I don't mean to do things phony. I don't mean that. As a matter of fact, manufacturing things to create buzz can be the exact opposite. You can actually, I think we've talked about this, you can actually take things away from what you're doing and give more an expose of what it is that you're doing and how you make decisions and why you're doing the work you're doing and who you're working with and how the work you're doing is affecting their lives and how their lives are affecting the lives of people around them. So that would be, to me, a manufactured way of creating drama and interest in your association. And that's not about pretending you're something else. That's removing unnecessary layers that are obscurifying what it is that you're doing.
That's right. I think that's beautiful what you just said. And it takes me back to one of our earlier episodes about being an apple tree making apples.
Right.
Right. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you got to go back and listen to all of our earlier episodes to find that reference.
Right.
But, there are so many organizations that have tacked so much stuff onto them that are especially revenue generating opportunities that are not in alignment with who they are at their essence. That when they pare that stuff away, it's like you get that gleaming DNA, you get that sense of something special that's at the core, and that's very attractive, right?
Right. That you're, well, to continue with that metaphor, right? The apple tree growing apples. I say it's people want to be, they want to be with something that's doing what it was put on earth to do.
Right.
Because they assume if it was doing what it was put on earth to do, it's probably doing an amazing job. And
right.
people want to be with things, people, objects, like doing an amazing job, doing what they were put here to do. So, right, an apple tree growing apples, those apples are probably amazing. An apple tree growing oranges is probably not so great.
Right.
So, right. So it's exposing, like why you're actually here. And by the way, like if that sounds prosaic and ordinary to us today, years ago, I mean, I'm certainly old enough to know where you would never talk about this stuff in the world of business. It's this idea, like 30 years ago or so, however, if you were talking about this stuff, like I know the people I used to work for then, they'd say, why do I care? Like, you can care about this stuff on your own time.
Right.
Like you're here to like turn a profit. You're here to ring the register.
Right.
You're here to do whatever it is. Why would I care what's driving you? I don't, and so that has become important today, what drives you and why you do what it is you do. And so I'm arguing that perhaps in the near future, in X+3, it's going to be even more important because it's kind of evolving to become more and more important. Like, and what would bringing meaning to the workplace or bringing meaning to the association in an even more intense way than it is now, what would that look like?
Yes. Well, one of the things I was talking with Lisa McCleod just yesterday, and she's of course, the originator of the phrase noble purpose and all that stands for in a business context. And we were talking about how both of us are like, I'm slammed right now. I am, my dance card is full and she is too. And what's happening is that in the business world right now, there's this escalation of the desire to do grand challenges and noble purpose. People are really interested in showing that their organization is making the world a better place. Exactly to your point, right? 30 years ago, even 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, it was much less than it is now. Now there's this, confluence, everything from racial justice and equity to climate change, to the economy being in trouble, to global supply chain interruptions, to the pandemic. There's all of these things are hitting us at the same time. And organizations that seem out of touch with that or are not helping address that feel like organizations that people don't want to do business with. And so many leaders now are gravitating to the noble purpose and they're saying, how do I harness this energy for my organization? Because I want to be around in 3 years. And I don't think an organization that doesn't do this will be.
Right. Well, and by the way, if we jump back our aesthetic of looking outside associations for motivation, if we jump back to the story about Houdini that I had told, if you think about it, escaping from manacles and handcuffs and straitjackets and footballs and paper bags, escaping from, and water torture units, escaping from things like those is not really magic per se. It's not like, like catching a coin that wasn't there magically floating in the air and having it vanish. It's not really that. It's what we in magic, it's being an escape artist. It's what we in magic would call an allied art. There are a bunch of allied arts to magic. And so I would then, just as a thought experiment with you, the executives in the association world, like who's allied to who you are?
Right.
Like what are the allied arts, not to the world of the association, but your specific association.
Right.
Like what's just outside of it, but that could be part of it, but maybe you're not using yet. So Houdini reached to something that was outside the strict definition of magic. And he reached there. And not only that, he helped amp it up with danger. And by the way, I'm not saying he's the originator of any of these things. He was just the chief proponent. It's not like he invented escapology, as you would call it, or danger in magic. He didn't invent those things. He was just a chief proponent. But he did reach outside magic. And so he added things that weren't there. He did escapes, which are not part of magic, and he made them dangerous, which was not necessarily part of magic. So where in the association world, right? Like what would be an example of, yeah.
So
what's an allied art?
Well, so the interaction field that we were talking about earlier in our webinar, the book of the same name by Eric Wachenfehler, is about creating a field. It's about acknowledging, not creating, acknowledging that there's a field that's like an ecosystem that makes it possible for you to do your work in your business. And that field includes partners, it includes competitors, it includes things that are influencing the market that you have no control over. And in the book, The Interaction Field, you activate the players in that field to create value with each other, not even through you necessarily, all under a frame of a higher purpose, a noble purpose. So like the example I used in the webinar was John Deere, that's right out of the book, and how John Deere, which sells tractors for tens of thousands of dollars, began to focus on the frame of we care for those who care for the earth. And that allowed them to make connections with seed companies, with fertilizer companies, with ag tech, with venture capitalists, with the general public, with people who were driving non-John Deere equipment. And it connected them to all of them. And then they found new revenue streams. They discovered that the sensors on their tractors could provide valuable data to seed companies that the seed companies were willing to pay for, to fertilizer companies that the fertilizer companies were willing to pay for. And that generated revenue streams that were in the allied spaces. Before, they had been selling their tractors to farmers, period. Now, suddenly, they were selling data to seed farmers and to fertilizer companies and many, many, many others. So if you think as an association, I occupy a particular space, is there a way for me to activate different value wells, different wells that are spouting value among the players in my ecosystem? And some of those I can tap for monetization. That is an example of using those allied spaces as value creation. And I believe people are beginning to think that way. They're beginning to think it's not just about I'm creating this product or service, I'm selling it to that customer, I'm getting a margin. It's about how do we spawn value and capture it where we can. And that requires that view, that's the lens that has that wider scope that includes the allied arts in whatever sector you're in.
Right. So you focus on the overarching idea, which in John Deere's case was,
we care for those who care for the land.
Right, right. And then all kinds of industries and job types and people psychographically or so, they start to fall within the realm of that, of the pull of that kind of thing.
Right. And importantly, it opens them up to some of those large overarching issues I was just discussing: sustainable farming, food distribution, climate change. These are big, wicked problems that the world is going to be facing for decades. And John Deere is cementing their niche into those spaces, when other companies that simply sell tractors may be pushed by the wayside because they're seen as anti-climate, anti-green or anti-sustainability, right? Because they're just in it for a buck. They're just trying to make their money. And so that having that larger, higher purpose embeds you in the concerns of the culture, not just the customer.
Right. One is leading with your product or service, and the other is leading with your cause, essentially.
Yes. Right.
Beautiful. Right. Well, thank you all for listening. We'll be talking more about these kinds of things real soon, and not in X+3, but much sooner. I'm Mark Levy.
I'm Seth Cohen.
See you soon.